All right, so I'm going to talk about my research, which is lovingly called the Stingray Diaries. And we call it this because we do a lot of tagging and tracking and learn a lot about the day-to-day lives of these animals that are incredibly common, but we don't know a whole lot about them. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about basically what I've been up to for the last 3 years or 4 years of my PhD. So a little bit about me, apart from that great introduction just then. I am a third year PhD student at Macquarie Uni, but I have been looking into the coastal sharks of Eastern Australia for around the last 10 years or so, mostly through my research lab at the Fish Lab. And I started off with these little guys down here, the Port Jackson sharks, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and studied them during my undergraduate degree. Before moving on to their flattened cousins being the stingrays. So my research broadly focuses on human-wildlife interactions. Specifically, my PhD focuses on how humans interact with coastal ray species. So in our coastal environments, one resource that these rays come across is the discards from recreational fishing, and I'm mainly looking at how they interact with this resource. So food provisioning is essentially people feeding wildlife, simple as that. And this can be sort of incidental, where they come into human environments and they're feeding on some of the, some of our rubbish and discards and things like that. And it can also be intentional as well, which is used really widely in wildlife tourism, basically to facilitate encounters between people and wild animals. And this activity has been shown to have some benefits to these species. It's helped with conservation because people come out the other side with a greater appreciation of these animals, which is particularly important for sharks and rays because they are threatened the world over. A lot of different species are. It's also been shown to help with species recovery, bringing some species back from the brink of extinction almost. And also animals can have increased survival from having this extra food source, helping with reproduction. They don't have to put as much energy into looking for food. They can put that into reproduction and boosting their population numbers. But there is this growing body of evidence showing that it does a lot more harm than good, and usually these impacts are cumulative. So there can be changes to natural behaviour and their space use by animals sort of artificially grouping over these resources. This can cause changes in energy budgets from animals getting either too much food or the wrong foods, can throw that energy balance off, which can change trophic relationships. So these animals are being potentially lured out of environments that they would naturally be in, which can alter their trophic relationships. And animals can also put in a lot of energy into begging and defending this resource, and not actually spending a lot of time feeding, which seems a bit counterproductive. It can lead to increased stress and disease. So these animals are sort of artificially grouping and having to interact in these close quarters, which can be stressful. And if there's people there and handling and patting and all that kind of stuff, that can cause a lot of stress. And it can be a vector for disease, where disease can just travel really quickly through these groups where these animals would naturally be more isolated from each other. Disease can travel around really quickly in these big groups. It can also lead to injuries, especially where animals are brought into these human areas, like this whale shark here that's come into contact with a boat prop in one of the feeding sites in Oslob in the Philippines. And it can also lead to malnutrition from the wrong foods, and also increased aggression, not only towards each other, but even towards people, like this seal that unfortunately bit a fisherman down at Narooma boat ramp that's been causing a few issues the last couple of years. And as I mentioned, these impacts are usually not acting in isolation. Individual animals and groups are experiencing a whole array of these. But the important thing to note is that this research, the reason that we know all these impacts comes from a wildlife tourism perspective. But my research is specifically targeted on situations where these animals are sort of incidentally fed, where it's completely, happening under the, it's not even on the radar of managers to be managed. Whereas in wildlife tourism, management can come in quickly and usually rectify these issues. But when nobody knows that it's happening, there's nothing done about it. So my research looks at this situation, which is happening with recreational fishing. So recreational fishing is huge in Australia, as you all probably know. About 5 million Australians fish recreationally every single year. So it's a lot of people on the water, a lot of fish getting caught. And when you come back from your day of fishing, you clean those fish, usually at the edge of the water on these fish cleaning facilities. It's accepted practice just to discard that waste back into the water. But there is a whole myriad of animals that actually forage this resource, from your regular fish and invertebrates, seabirds, the seal that was causing issues down at Narooma, and of course smooth stingrays, which you guys I'm very sure are very familiar with. If you have fish cleaning happening on the south coast of Australia, you probably got a group of smooth stingrays nearby because they love a good buffet. So the aim of the Stingray Diaries is to basically evaluate how food provisioning in this sort of incidental, small-scale context is influencing the space use of smooth stingrays as well as southern eagle rays. And our secondary aim is we know virtually nothing about these species, so we want to try and fill some of these knowledge gaps, it's amazing that we don't know anything about them because they're so common, you see them everywhere, and we know nothing about them. We don't know anything about their reproductive periodicity, like their biology, ecology, that sort of stuff. So we hope to fill some knowledge gaps. So my research, first I'll give a little bit of info about these my favorite species on the planet, the smooth stingray. They are found on the south coast of Australia, around New Zealand and southern Africa, as well as potentially off Japan and eastern Russia, which was something that came out in the last couple of years. So again, we're learning something new every single day. And they are the largest species of marine stingray in the world. They grow up to 350 kilos and grow to about 2.5 meters wide. In fact, they're so big you can even see them from space. Well, at least from Google Earth. And you can imagine my surprise when I was searching through Google Earth and I found this is Bendalong down on the south coast of New South Wales, where these animals are actually hand-fed as part of an unregulated tourist attraction. Got some tourists in the water here and a friendly little smooth stingray cruising along the shore here. So that was pretty exciting to find that. And they are individually identifiable by their dot patterns. So they've got these series of dots on either side of their bodies, and they tend to keep these dots for, we assume their entire lives, and they are individually identifiable. So if you have seen them and have photos, compare notes with each other, and you might find that you've been seeing the same individuals. And the second species that we study is the southern eagle ray. So these guys are seen often with the smooth stingrays in a lot of open coast sort of places. They are found in the same range in southern Australia and New Zealand. It was originally thought that they were different species, but they're actually been recently identified as being the same species. And they've got that sort of sandy colour and the blue patterning on their backs as well. So my research takes place on the south coast of New South Wales. And I'm very, very lucky to work in the beautiful area of Jervis Bay and Bendalong a little bit further south down here. So the reason that we study this particular area is that we have a couple of sites where these animals are exposed to different levels of food provisioning. So at Woolamaya, this is our original site. We've been going here for the last 4 or 5 years, and there's been a 30-year history of the smooth stingrays coming in. There's one just in the background here behind all these pelicans. 30 years, these guys have been coming in and scavenging fish scraps discarded by the local fishermen here. Down in Bendalong, as I mentioned before, this is a little bit of a different context. It's an unregulated stingray feeding tourist attraction, basically spread by word of mouth. And during summer and weekends, you can have hundreds of people getting into the water, bags and bags of pilchards, hand feeding these stingrays, it's an incredible experience. Like, you can just see the joy in people's faces, which I love, but it is completely unmanaged and we don't know what sort of impacts it's having. And whether we need to sort of mitigate those or not. And the third site we have is Murray's, and this is kind of like our control group. We have rays coming in here, but it's actually illegal to clean your fish. So it gives us something to compare to of what as close as we can get to a wild population to compare with these two different types of food provisioning sites. So what have we learnt so far? The first thing, and I think one of the most interesting things that I'm still sort of struggling to figure out, is that all of the adult smooth stingrays and southern eagle rays that we get are females, every single one of them. And a lot of them are in quite late stages of pregnancy as well. So as you can see, smooth stingrays are pretty bossy. They don't really like sharing the food with the eagle rays. But so we think that it's potentially that because the females are usually much larger than the males, we think the females might just be competitively excluding the males out of these areas. When we do see males though, it's sort of at our site at Murray's, which is closer to the mouth of the bay. We only really see males coming in following one of the females. And that could be that the males are just tend to be more open ocean compared to the females who sort of take refuge in the bay and utilize these resources. But also because they are usually in quite late stages of pregnancy, we think that it might be related to sort of upping that energy intake whilst simultaneously reducing the amount of energy needed for foraging. So they've got these, 7 to 10 pups that are going to be born at 30 centimeters wide, growing inside them. So they need a lot of food to sustain that. So that might be a potential explanation. They're pretty good at finding free food when it's available. So that kind of makes a bit of sense. So we know that the rays are in these areas, but how does this relate to when food provisioning is happening, when fish cleaning is happening, when there's tourists there? So what we know is that fishermen come back from their day of fishing. It's usually in the afternoon from about midday through to dusk. And we would expect to see a peak in the smooth stingray visitation to these areas. And sure enough, around 11 o'clock, it starts really getting up there. And we see this peak just after lunchtime when the boat ramp is full and there's plenty of fish cleaning going on. But there's also plenty of environmental factors that run on these 24-hour cycles. So it could be water temperature. I said that they were usually grabbers. They could be using the warmer water temperatures to help with their gestation, something like that. But when you have a look at day of the week, because humans are incredibly predictable and there's no environmental phenomena that run on this 7-day cycle apart from human behaviour. So, we go to work during the week and then we go out for fun on the weekend, and that usually in these fishing towns involves fishing. And what we see is that the visitation for the rays is quite low around Thursday. It then bumps right up to a peak on Sunday and then back down again towards Thursday, and it all starts over again. So it's a pretty clear indication that, this fish cleaning that's going on is definitely why these rays are here. And we know that they're there, we know when they're there, but how far are they going? Are they basically just sleeping, where they're eating? Or are they traveling further? Is it the same ones coming back? That sort of thing. So we had a bit of a look at how this compared between those 3 sites. And at our control site, we find that they're using a massive area. This is about 100 square kilometres or so. And they're just moving. They head out of the bay quite a lot, moving around really often. Compare that to Woolamaya, where they're getting fed the fish scraps, and their space use is really centred on the boat ramp, which is right here. And that red shading there is the their core use range where they're spending the majority of their time. And then when we have a look at Bendalong, where they're getting fed for tourism, this area is about 5 square kilometres, so they're not going very far at all. They're pretty much just staying right at the beach here, which is just here. And maybe a little bit up, maybe a little bit down, but they're spending most of their time at this site here. But does this compare across the 2 species? So most of that is about the smooth stingrays, and we wanted to know if it affects all rays the same, or if we see differences between these 2 relatively similar rays but also very different rays. And what we find is that the eagle rays are actually more common at these sites, particularly down at Bendalong, than the smooth stingrays are. And what we find is, being a tourist site, the tourists start turning up sort of 9, 10, 11 a.m. and stay throughout the day. And we see this massive peak in the eagle rays coming in the morning, and quite high numbers during the day. Whereas the smooth rays, they sort of turn up around the same time, but it's sort of, they'll come in, if there's food, they'll stay, if there's not, they'll leave. So we definitely do see that difference, and this translates to their space use as well. So eagle rays, this is about 3 square kilometres around that beach, and they are pretty much just staying in this exact area. But the smooth stingrays are travelling about 25 square kilometres along this coastline and being much more transient, which is really interesting. Because we do see a bit of a difference up at Woolamaya with the smooth stingrays. They do tend to show more of this pattern than this pattern. So we're still sort of scratching the surface on this relationship here. And we've also managed to get some of those unexpected insights into their biology and ecology as well, which is really exciting. So one of the things that we've been finding little bits of information on is their reproduction. So we had no idea about how often they reproduced. We know sort of how many pups they have, but we don't know where they're having them. We don't know where they're breeding. But we found this, one of our girls, this is Raylene from Woolamaya. She's one of our original rays. And we've been tracking her for the last 4 years. And what we found just last year, actually, was here the purple is the creek where the boat ramp is, green is the bay, and yellow is outside of the bay. And what we found is that when we took this photo around this time here, and not long after she left the bay, she's quite gravid here. She's really bulging. And she left the bay and then came back about a month later. She was still quite pregnant. She looked exactly the same. I don't think she'd had her pups, but she had these brand new mating wounds on the trailing edges of her fins. So what we're thinking is that because we're seeing the males near the mouth of the bay, that the females are heading out of the bay to breed and then coming back into, you know, these areas that they know and these protected areas, potentially to pup or, you know, just get a free feed, which I don't blame them. So that's a nice little insight into their reproduction, but again, still scratching the surface on that. But one of the most interesting things I think we've found is these insights into their home ranges. So usually people expect them to have a home range of about 25 kilometres, which is about the size of Jervis Bay here. But we've had them show up 50 kilometres north off Shoalhaven. We've had them turn up 100 kilometres south down off Bateman's Bay. We've had them turn up 150 k's north off South Sydney. And incredibly, we have had males, females, adults, juveniles, multiples of them turn up off Merimbula down near the border. And they usually go for about a month and then come back. And it's not any real sort of timing to it. So we're not entirely sure of the purpose, but it could be related to reproduction. Like we saw Raylene took off and came back. And I think actually on that trip, she actually went down to Merimbula. So yeah, we're still learning lots of new things about these guys, which is really, really cool. And something that I really love to do. So hopefully get to do it for a bit longer. So just to quickly summarize, basically this small scale food provisioning, this incidental food provisioning is definitely influencing the space use of these guys. We are seeing changes there, comparing it to that, you know, control population. It has potential implications for reproduction because they are in breeding status and we only really see females. And it could potentially be causing changes to those trophic relationships where these animals are being sort of lured away from their natural environments that they would be acting in. But it's very early days. This is the first study to look at the effects of food provisioning from recreational fishing. So, you know, we need a whole lot more research done before we can fully understand this relationship. But I'm looking forward to working on it a little bit more and seeing what else we can get. So a few people I'd like to thank, of course, my university and DPI, my funding partners being Holsworth Wildlife Research Endowment and ESA, Australian Graduate Women, VEMCO, IMOS and SIMS. And of course, get in touch. All my socials are there. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.